All right, we'll go ahead and call this work session to order. The first item of business, I think we're all very excited about, Stormwater Asset Mapping Project Update. Presentation from Barge Design, and I'll turn it over to Deputy Director, soon to be Community Development Director Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor.
Congratulations.
Don't you get done?
I
Yeah, that's good.
appreciate your support.
Yeah.
So this has been, I think, a little bit coming. I think a couple of months ago, we tried to put it on the agenda, but we had some other more pressing and dire topics to get across. So we were fortunate to be able to have Barge put it off a little bit. So tonight, I'm going to introduce Matt Stovall. He is the Senior Vice President and Client Service Leader for Barge Design Solutions. This is our consulting firm that we have under contract to help us with our TDEC and our ARPA-funded stormwater program. So tonight, we're going to give you a brief 101 to kind of let you know what the intent is and where we are to date.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, my name is Matt Stovall, Senior Vice President with Barge Design Solutions. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Last time we were here, I think it was this past fall, October, September, something like that, when we were getting started on the project, and y'all gave us the opportunity to begin. Since then, we've been doing the data collection phase, and we were essentially completed with that, and thought that it would be helpful for you to see what we have found and kind of how all these pieces of information fit together. It's kind of neat when you start to look at it, the pipes and everything else, when you start to collect it and seeing what kind of the picture it is that you make in terms of taking next steps, which will be a model, computer model, where we can simulate certain types of actions relative to flooding, et cetera. And we've also been able to identify some critical items that needed to be addressed, and Greg and the crew, the public works people, have gotten out there and taken care of them almost immediately. And it's really kind of, we've already revised our model to say this is done. So anyway, I'm going to introduce Clayton Forrester is our expert, one of our experts on the model to be talking about the project. And then Adrian Ward is also engineer from our national office that's going to be talking. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just a quick question. I don't have a clicker. Can I stand over by the screen? Is that okay so I can click through, or do I need to stand up here?
Or can Tracy click through the slides for you?
Yeah, that's fine. I can just say next slide whenever I'm ready. So yeah, I'm Clayton Foster. I'm with Barge. I'm the project manager for this. So excited to introduce y'all to the project and what we've done so far before Adrian takes y'all through the modeling. So we'll go to the next slide. This is an agenda. So we're gonna go through our background and objectives. What are we looking for this project? The planning and pilot study, inventory condition assessment, the model setup and analysis, and the capital improvement plans, and then the system improvements. So how does this all work together in a strategic way as we work through this? Next slide. So Red Bank, next slide, sorry. So just talking about background. So there was no stormwater asset information for Red Bank. So it's kind of starting off with a blank slate for the project. And this is Red Bank, as y'all are well aware, with the central, I think next slide. There's a Stringer's Branch, which cuts down the middle, is y'all's main artery from a stormwater standpoint. Everything feeds down on both sides to serve there before it goes in and out. Perfect. That'll be really helpful. Stormwater doesn't follow political boundaries or anything like that, so it all intermingles with Chattanooga, Hamilton County, coming in and out as it goes through. But Stringer's Branch is the main artery, as I said before. Stringer's Branch was modeled back in 1979 by TVA. As a part of this, was updated in 1990. With that major artery, that major system of Stringer's Branch, with it being 35-ish years old, 34 years old, we recommend, and Leslie and the team have agreed that we should remap that stream. There's going to be a lot of updates. What does that look like over the 35 years? So some of this project is going to be a re-update of those, just with the proximity of existing properties to the roadway, everything like that. It's going to be pretty critical to know what those new 100-year flood maps look like as that affects the Again, looking at Stringer's Branch, there's quite a difference of what this looks like. Kind of those top left two, it's a pretty natural looking stream with some development kind of coming in. You get up where there's some pretty hard boundaries, those next top right and lower left. And then where it starts getting totally encapsulated by buildings being built on top of it before regulation had really taken over, bridges and things like that with pipes and things like that. So again, us getting out there to understand that information is only going to help us provide a better model back to you guys. There's additionally about 2,600 feet of encapsulated creek. So once it goes in, it doesn't exit. Some of those other photos I showed you, they, you can see the daylight on the other side was a single building, but in this instance, it is a completely encapsulated creek.
I'm assuming that's an issue.
It is not an issue. It is not uncommon. So just some of the type of photos that we've seen through here of the different varying conditions that are in there of different culvert sizes. And so from a stormwater perspective, though, that's not uncommon. We're going to show you some Metro Nashville work it was very common back when development was expanding away from city centers to encapsulate creeks and then and build over from development. So there's going to be a few of the design plans you'll see in the future of just seeing where streets are laid out in nice rectangles, square blocks, but the creek is running diagonal to those. And so it's not uncommon. It's just a restriction point and something to be aware of as we move forward. And we are looking into this portion of Stringer's Branch with our work. So again, that next phase is the planning and pilot study. So we recommend let's look at a smaller area of the system. Let's refine some of our assumptions. Let's make sure the city is comfortable with what our process looks like. Are we providing you information that's usable to you and is going to meet your goals and objectives as we get into this? So starting with a small area just helps so we don't make a smaller problem a bigger problem. And we'll talk about one of those ways we did that here coming up. So inventory size. There's a bunch of different ways to look at inventory. You can look at, this is at the very beginning of the phase. We didn't have any existing information. So what assumption, how many assets are we going to see when we get out there? We provided Leslie, just based on our experience, trying to look at other municipalities of a similar size and development. 12-inch and greater is one way to look at this. You're going to pretty much collect everything that's in the system at that point. We estimated there'd be about 4,500 structures that would get done with it, that we would find at that level of detail. 15-inch and greater, 3,200 structures. And generally, that's the minimum size you're ever going to recommend for any sort of improvement when it's a stormwater system. Any sort of driveway culvert will always, generally the minimum size would be a 15-inch. Sometimes you'll get to a minimum of 18 inches. And we just haven't gotten to that point with Red Bank to know what our recommendation would be for y'all. So for the pilot study area, we divided up Red Bank based on drainage area. So again, some of these drainage areas are going to extend outside of Red Bank, but in a general sense, we looked at this. We talked to the city staff about where is going to be the most representative area for us so that we can refine those costs. And so drainage area B and C were where we concentrated our efforts, thinking that's the most representative of what the whole community will be. So again, we can go back to those assumptions of how many structures are we going to see as we get into this, and then adjust accordingly if we need to. So just a more zoomed in approach there. So as we go out there, we're going to collect information on all the different assets that you have out there. So that's going to include culverts, inlets, manholes, road crossings, open channels, just so we can develop an accurate model that we can start simulating rain events on. With that, we're going to get a unique ID, so something that's specific to that asset. So when you're referencing it, that'll always be the point that you would want to go so you can get that work history, get the inverts and depths. A lot of this is what we need from the model, but there's certain things that we did out there to provide additional opportunity for the city to improve the system. And so bike friendly, great. Is it running parallel to flow? Is it running parallel to traffic? Can you get a bike wheel stuck in it and potentially be a liability there? We'll go ahead and collect that so y'all can start maybe creating a improvement project to better that part of the system while we're there. That's just not, there's very little effort that comes with there. We're collecting a 360-degree video. So this is something we do a condition assessment, again, meant to refine the operations and maintenance program that y'all have. We're doing that on a 0 through 5 scale. Get Getting ahead of myself, I'm sorry. So going to inventory and data collection. So we talked about kind of what we were gonna do on that inventory level. Now that we've collected, this is what we're gonna go out, we started doing it. So we're gonna collect an image at the surface of what that asset looks like. You can see on the right side, this is meant to be a data viewer. So it's something that is available to the city staff. So you can click on a point, all these information in the next series of slides. It's just like a slider down, the scroll bar. You can get all of this information that we're gonna go through. So it starts off with the photo. And then we get into number of grates, there's 4, number of pipes, there's 1. So number of pipes leaving it, you can see the unique ID at the top of BB00306. Again, you know, going into what we need from the modeling side, what is the length, width, and depth of that structure? That condition assessment coming from that 360-degree video, and I'll show you a video of that here in just a minute. And so this is the 360-degree video. Oh, is there a? Here we go.
Oh, there's a stylus. Is that a stylus right there, Tracy? Does that help at all?
Well, I did something.
Yeah, that's how I exited out. Well, I can describe what you would see. You just say, you know, it's a way for us to do a condition assessment. Otherwise, somebody's gonna have to be confined space trained. They're gonna have to get lowered in there with all sorts of ventilation, all sorts of sensors, and it's just a much quicker way to do the same assessment. It captures a point in time. This is what this asset looked in 2020, April of 2024. You can always go back and reference it without ever having to go in the field, and it's just something that'll be available. And again, we're taking then still images of that video as it's going down to say this is why we condition assessed it that way, so that as they get into the operations and maintenance planning, they can say, oh, well, let's get all of our level 4s. So I would assume that we haven't run into any level 5s, so we're going down to level 4s. Let's get all of those. What does that look like in terms of project and project cost? Because those, you know, you could look on it at a grand scale if you're working on a 0 to 5 scale. 5s need to be immediately done. They're on the verge of collapse based on that assessment. A 4 is, hey, this needs to be replaced in a time frame of, let's say, 0 to 3, 0 to 5. Whenever you have, those would be your just highest priority to get out there to better maintain the system. And then so on and so forth as you go down, with 0 being brand new. And you could say it has a lifespan of 40 to 50 years. So we got out in Stringer's branch, again, to help with that HEC-RAS modeling so that we can now better define what the 100-year floodplain should be and that its effect on Stringer's branch, as it, you know, as we're getting into the model, what are those new floodplain extents for the 100-year floodplain? While we were doing this and getting our thing, this is another video that won't show, but we're taking a 360-degree photo at each of those cross sections, and that can spin you around so you can see at each of those, maybe even more useful, like, hey, where's this erosion happening? This looks very different. Like, did it erode? And you have a point in time here that you can go back and reference. For that Stringer's branch, the encapsulated portion, we're working through an evaluation process of it now. We've gone out and done surveying of this. This is some of the 3-day surveying, as you can see, of it going, the turns going under buildings and homes or in commercial businesses, but just to better help define what we're seeing in there so we can make recommendations going forward. This is the condition assessment. So now you can see actually some of the, you know, nobody had to enter the structure. It's something that could enter the grate, but you can see that this is a structure that, you know, might be a 4 just from the way you're looking at it. It's not on the verge of collapsing, but we need to prioritize it getting done. And you can see our rating system over to the left. But again, nobody had to enter it. This is something that can be done from the office. You can now have these other images over here of why we ranked it the way we did to make you know, if you start prioritizing, if there's 100 4s, we only have enough money to complete 20 of them, which are our priorities, ones of that. So major issues, as Matt said, our crews, when we're out on the field, they're looking for completely clogged illicit discharge and structural failures. You can see kind of completely clogged on there. Maybe that's a structural failure going down there so that the Public Works team can get out there. it's been very encouraging compared to some of our other municipalities, how responsive they have been. We've moved up the street after, to another one, and the crew has already been out there helping better rectify some of those completely clogged and those issues. So this is an old image of how many completely clogged, and a graphic from maybe a month ago that of how many are still out there. So again, as I said, we do this pilot study to help refine our costs for the inventory portion. So we went out there with a 15-inch and greater. When we were looking at our pilot study area, we anticipated there being around 1,000. When we got done with it, we found out there were 2,000. So we needed to rectify that. And so we revised our inventory size to be 18-inch and greater. And so it was encouraging, us making that small change. We virtually ended up right at where we thought the structure count would be. So we wanted to be at 3,200. We ended up at 3,320. Still a little bit of cleanup to work, but we have finished inventory for the largest portions of it. It would just be things on a modeling side for them to send back out our surveyors to say, hey, it looks like there's something in this area that maybe they missed. Maybe it's something that was over in a backyard that maybe they didn't want to access or didn't know was there, but they can now comfortably, because of somebody calling like, hey, can you look in this area? They can more refine their search, and that would just be on the modeling. But we think we're going to end up right around here. And you can see from this chart, just the different types of structures we've run into as it's come into, as we've completed the inventory phase. I'm going to pass it over to Adrian as we start talking about the model. Thank you.
Can you just push in these arrows?
The right arrow was awesome.
So I guess once the inventory was complete, that exists in sort of a GIS database. So it's really just a combination of points and lines. So the points, like Clayton mentioned, represent like head walls or inlets, things like that. Pipe ends where maybe there's not a head wall or an inlet, and then conduit. So it's a linear feature. So is it a pipe? Is it a open channel? And so we use that to build our H&H model. So that is sort of, I guess, what you'd imagine to be the skeleton. And then we have to develop the hydrology around it. What does the land look like around it that contributes to the flow? So the things that combine to generate those flows are what are your soils? Is all your soils where it's grassy areas, is that sand or is it clay? So the runoff characteristics differ greatly depending on what the underlying soil is. What's the land use? Is it a park or is it a paved shopping center? And then the topo, is it flat or is it hilly? So you get a really quick response. So we're able to do that. Soils, land use, all of those are freely available. And then the topographies, they just finished their LiDAR survey a few years ago. So there's LiDAR that we're able to use to delineate drainage areas and identify sort of the higher drainage patterns. And then, like I mentioned, the skeleton being the stormwater assets that we've actually collected. So we combine all that together to generate an H&H model. Like I described earlier, it's fairly simplistic. The green sort of shaded areas with the black outlines, those represent the subbasins that drain to each node, each junction box, each head wall. And then obviously the dots are the inlets where the water enters the system, and then the yellow is the pipes. Basically for your system with Stringer's Branch running down the middle, everything sort of drains to a point and then outfalls into Stringer's Branch. Once we're done with all the modeling, we will sort of merge those models together so you really have a composite model almost. Not that your boundary might allow for a little bit to discharge, a different direction but the majority of the drainage basin will come down to one outfall at the end of the city. So we're in that modeling process now. We like Clayton mentioned, we've collected all the inventory. Now we're modeling the various basins. I think we have four models going right now. 3 that started about the same time. The 4th one that began, and then there's 2. Is it 2 extra? 1 extra that is left, and once one of the modelers roll off of their model, we'll put them on that. These are some examples of what you'll see. So this is a sort of a display from the modeling software. There's a variety of things you can pick. We chose PC Swim. It has great interface with GIS, so that's a plus. The cost of the licenses are smaller than a lot, but the functionality is still really, really good. It runs an EPA engine, so that was developed by EPA for modeling. It just basically takes that engine and puts a lot of functionality in GIS function. I can't think of another word, but basically allows interaction with GIS and things like that. Speeds up the process of developing the models. So for our analysis, we see Stringer's Branch as being a pretty critical. I mean, it's your only outfall essentially. Since Dayton Boulevard runs along that, we see that as a higher level street. So we're looking at that, the 25-year minimum. These models do have flexibility in that we will build them so that they can go up to the 100-year. But some of these are not, some of these designs, some of these facilities don't really need to be evaluated at the 100 years. So we're modeling Stringer's Branch at a 25-year recurrence interval. That's a storm that has a 4% chance of occurring in any given year. For all the sort of drainage that sort of drains into that, since those are mostly minor streets, probably going to be a 10-year on that. We don't want to over design. We don't want to design like a local road for 50, 100 years. It's just wasting money. The level of service that we'll look at. So once we get the models built, we'll run it. The model will show us where water is leaving the system, where we don't meet our level of service. And right now our level of service is identified if water leaves the rim of the structure, if water comes out of the grate, if water surcharge or exceeds the top of a head wall, then water has left the system. And we want to identify those issues and upsize appropriately. We will also do a final run to sort of at the 100-year level to just identify any kind of building flooding. So we'll have some examples in a minute, but you have the ability. One of the things we like about PC Swim is it allows inundations to be plotted. It basically just takes the how high the water surface gets above the structure and sort of draws this sort of polygon out that shows the inundation extent, basically wherever it hits your LiDAR surface. And so it gives us a check on, while we designed storm sewer to handle a 10-year event, we don't want a house to flood. And so your storm sewer can fail in terms of it's got water leaving the system, but as long as it doesn't flood a house, it's still functioning appropriately. But we do want to do a check on that. So that'll be one of our checks, and we'll plot those, like I said, in an inundation area to give you an idea. Is this 6 inches of water or is this 3 feet of water? Does it just catch up or?
I just pressed it a few times.
And then holding your head right.
All right. So we talked about, Clayton mentioned some about Stringer's Branch. This is again a Nashville basin, and you can see the same sort of thing. These are the inundation areas. So basically where water is leaving the system and ponding, what does it look like? The left slide represents a 10-year storm event. The right side is a 100-year, but you can see similar situation as Stringer's Branch. This was a bricked up stream, so it's cutting diagonal across a bunch of properties. It's undersized, so it's surcharging, and it's just common to see that as development moves in. Everything was drained towards the creek, but they want to fill around it, so let's just brick it up and go over the top of it.
So, and it just so I'm reading this right, so all the little blue wideness right there, that's flooding.
Yeah,
Right?
it would be
On a 5-year and a 100-year, right?
on 10-year and then 100-year
Okay.
for the worst. And it's just to give a depiction on where you anticipate water to leave the system if we had a mouse, we could click on it and tell you how deep it is.
Right, all right.
So once we've sort of got the model built, we do try to stay with a sort of a watershed approach. The reason we do that, so this is an example. You can see area 1 there, and I guess it's hard to see where area 1 and area 2 meet, but mainly area 1 is the whole area for the most part. Whatever contributes to those outfalls that are running into the river there. And the reason we do that, it typically leads to larger projects, but fewer. And what we don't want to do is if we broke that up into a bunch of different areas, you really have to implement the projects from downstream to upstream. If I add a big pipe where it's restricted upstream and it just allows more water into a flooding area, then I'd really just move the flooding downstream. So just wanted to make you aware. So you'll see, area 1 would have a big price tag just because geographically it's bigger, there's more problems. Not that you have to spend it all at one time, but you do have to implement it as you move upstream so you don't flood anybody downstream. So capital improvement plan. So the end result, the deliverables that we'll be providing to you, and these are some examples of what we provide to Metro, are alternatives. Right now, generally speaking, there's really 2 alternatives. There can be a variety of ways you get to those, but you either increase the conveyance, so you upsize pipes, so you move it through your system faster, or you create storage areas, so basically you throttle or hold back flow upstream, giving your undersized system time to pass a smaller peak flow. And so in the end, what will end up will be the deliverable of these project pages that identify where we've recommended pipe upsizing or storage options. And basically there'll be a small description, and there'll be some key maps and things like that, but there'll be a description of what this project is. And then the benefits of it. Is it preventing 3 homes from flooding or 10 homes from flooding or whatever that is, and an opinion of probable construction cost, so that it sort of falls into, allows you to do some of your capital improvement planning off of those. And then system improvement. So in the end, we've got 10 projects or 100 projects or whatever, those get grouped together and you're able to build capital improvement plans off of that. You know what it takes to fix your system, and once that's sort of quantified, you can determine how quickly you want to implement that. But it will serve as sort of a planning tool going forward, and how you can address your issues. So is that the last slide? Schedule. And so right now, so as Clayton mentioned, we finished all the inventory. We've started on the model, and I think our anticipation is we should have model proposed results. We talked with Leslie and Greg on some of the modeling on the existing basins right now, but now we're addressing problem areas that have been identified. I think, what was the schedule? Maybe I should have taken this slide.
July. We'll have
Yeah, we'll have at least 2 basins done in July, so we'll start to be able to give you some recommended improvements. Now, Clayton mentioned we broke this basin ultimately drains to 1 outfall. We broke it up into multiple drainage areas that drain to Stringer's Branch for the sake of we could have multiple surveying crews running at the same time, and they wouldn't be working on top of each other. And we are modeling those separately, but eventually they will all tie into Stringer's Branch, and we'll go back and merge that model into one so that you have just sort of a composite model. It'll be larger, but that way we'll be able to account for all the, if there's a choke point in Stringer's Branch, you'll see that issue up in the sort of the adjacent areas. And so it'll just be a composite model, so you don't have to move back and forth in between models. Any more questions?
I got some.
Commissioner Phillips?
Yeah. So, flood insurance is high as a cat's back. And, this will give us a very accurate modeling map, but that won't change any of the FEMA's flood map or anything, or what?
You will have, so PC SWIM is an accepted H&H model by FEMA. So if you ever wanted to remap any, you'll have the updated hydrology that will be done to FEMA standards. The models are capable of running 100-year. Now we will run 100-year through just to look at flood inundation. So you will have the ability, but you would have the data and the models to remap. You just would need to go through the FEMA.
Well,
remap
so
process.
for instance, I've got a commercial property over the encapsulated area that, but then after this right here, we'll tell how high flood water will get in my building then, right? On 100-year,
Yes.
right? And what is that 100-year flood X many inches in an hour, or is it, how does that get measured?
Yeah, it's so all these storm events are assumed a 24-hour, one day, so 24-hour duration. So you apply that depth 7 point something inches over 24 hours,
Right.
and it runs it through.
Because I mean, it's something that happened like in Florida, that just happened down there. That was like a once in a millennium
Right,
kind
we
of thing,
don't-
right? And that'd just be,
I mean, FEMA doesn't regulate, FEMA only regulates the 100.
okay.
One of the big advantages of what we're putting together is for individual property owners, just like you.
Right.
Where we've not had information to provide them, where are the tiles coming in, where does it drain? We can show them that. Also for new development, making sure that what gets put in is not going to be a negative impact on our system, because we've got a inventory system that truly tells us what we have.
Right.
So it's very beneficial to property owners. We've used it a couple of times already with development that's trying to come in.
Good. Well, as property, sorry.
Oh, you're good.
As properties that don't, or flood, stormwater doesn't over political boundaries. It also doesn't go over your yard. If you got it running over your yard and things like that, because I've had some things and, so I'm just kind of wondering, is that going to be kind of included in the project? If you got something that has failed that is,
So
I mean, how does that work on private property versus just the structures that the city owns?
So currently the model is only developed to route flows to a structure that we've identified. We tried to stick with the public structures, not any
Okay.
private. Now, in the end, when we have these concepts, you'll have a concept that's not ready to hand to a contractor to go out and build it. It gives a designer, whoever y'all would hire, gives them, the concept, the flow, what size pipe does it need to be? And it needs to sort of generally be from here to here, but they'll go in and do a detailed design. Normally, like this overflow and stuff like that through people's yards, that would be taken care of in a detailed design.
Okay.
This model, while it is doing some inundation areas, it's really only looking at the size of the pipe or the ditch and what elevation that forces it to.
So, are the recommendations you guys are making based on just purely the current quality of the structure, or are you looking at any sort of impact to the area by the flooding? Like, do you weight those in any way? Like, if Food City is impacted by flooding, would you weight that higher than a different area of?
Well, right now we're just we do want to get to a point where we would recommend, this is more critical, a hospital or the fire department, even better. Fire department that would sort of rise to the top, but I guess we still need to work through like a criteria, I guess, of weighting one versus another. But we generally would focus on critical infrastructure first, hospital, fire stations, things like that. Then, developed areas, is it living or whatever? And then third, if it's just ponding honestly, if it's ponding in a yard, but it's not made it to the structure or something, that would definitely follow to the lowest tier.
Okay.
Did you have something to add, Deputy Director?
I'm sorry?
Did you have something to add?
No, I think it just kind of compounds the whole desire and the intent of us going after this project to begin with. There are so many unknowns. And as we move forward, especially in capital improvement programming, to take a look at where can we spend the most money that has the biggest impact. And that's really probably what we'll end up starting to look at when we bring information to you, helping us decide where do we start. We can't do everything immediately. This is gonna be generational changes as we go. But just having this information and giving us that framework on what is next, what can we afford to do, where do we need to focus on, so.
Well, we took our first bite of the elephant.
Absolutely, yes.
We have a question from.
You
Commissioner
mentioned,
Bernard-Sardi.
this is completely out of my wheelhouse, of course, so you're educating me, but you mentioned 2 basins will be created in July, or what? Is
Well,
that a
I'm sorry,
structure?
it was, I used the word basin, it's drainage area, so we divided up into 6 drainage areas and we've modeled them, or we're in the process of modeling them, so basically for that area sort of outline, we will be through the complete process, so we would have collected the inventory, we will have modeled what the existing conditions are right now, and then we would have recommended improvements where we see like undersized pipes or ponding areas. And that, so we should have the complete process on those 2 drainage areas done by, in July.
2 drainage areas of the 6 sections.
So these 2 drainage
B and
areas,
C that they took
A and
samples
G
from.
and B and C, we got our modelers started on those sooner. And so those are progressing in the process farther. So we'll have recommendations and, projects and those project areas for these 2 with the other 3 areas just following behind, just in terms of when they got scheduled with our staff.
Thank you.
And our basins are created by the topography of an area. You pick a high point and figure, okay, where's the water come? It comes down to this pipe and it comes over here. So our basins are defined by topography.
Are you all going to also include cost estimates with
Yes,
these things?
yeah.
Okay.
They'll have so it will be, what would be more considered like a conceptual level cost. So the hard stuff like the pipes and the inlets, we got a good idea on that. Things like pavement and we don't really know if there's, we'll reference up the sanitary, but other than that, we don't know if there's foam or whatever. So we will estimate pavement, but that'll be pretty much based off of the size of the pipe and how deep it is. But then normal practice is on these conceptual levels, you figure up what you know, and then you add like a 35% contingency to that. You also add for like permitting and stuff, contractor profit and stuff like that.
Will there also be like, I don't know, swells, I don't know how to put it, just a place where the water can go there? Is that going to be part of the recommendation?
Yeah, if it's, is it a pipe or is it?
Is it going to leave the
a ditch
system?
or-
Can we push it over in this field or
Yes.
whatever?
Yeah, there'll be a conceptual routing of, the water's coming here and it's oversized, we need to add another pipe, or we need to add an overflow channel to go from here to some distance downstream. We'll show conceptual routings
Okay.
and just let you know general, is it a pipe or is it a ditch and what's it made out of.
And then, okay, so we got our inventory, we got our modeling, we know that we need to do these things. I know with a lot of money, it can be done very rapidly, but what is the normal thing? Is this generational kind of thing? Is this going to be a never-ending project kind of thing?
Well, it will be, that's not, at least for another 10 years, I can't retire for now.
Yeah.
What we'll do is, so we'll come up with the cost that will come out of the modeling. We're also, as part of our scope, we're supposed to be reviewing like your stormwater user fee and things like that, and how much you can generate. So we'll have the costs, and then we'll look and see how much you can pay, and we'll sort of divide that.
And then, and of course, higher priorities and all that stuff. But I mean, in reality, it's something that takes decades to get done through. Okay.
That's related to a question I had. I noticed that your sample recommendations that you gave for the Nashville project were to improve, increase the pipe size or to add underground storage basins. Do any of your recommendations or options ever include any green infrastructure options?
So they can. The issue is, so green infrastructure generally designed on about a 1-year storm event. So like 1 inch or ish. But the 10-year storm event will be more around a 5-inch. So we could do that if you wanted. What that'll do is it'll start to expand. Now you're not talking about one pond that's acre and 10 feet deep. You're talking about a 10-acre pond that's 1 foot deep. And so you start to really extend it. Now, I think some of the recommendations for this one specifically on Stringer's Branch, where it's an open channel, if we see high velocities, the recommendation is likely going to be some stream restoration and things like that, which would be considered green. But bioretention generally bioretention isn't used as much for regional issues. It's generally more site specific. So the recommendation may be as some of stormwater changes or whatever to your regulations, maybe you start incorporating some of green infrastructure that would reduce it. But if we try to fix the whole problem with it, you're gonna take up a lot of land area.
Will there be any recommendations to that effect of recommendations for policy changes for new developments?
Probably, yes.
Thank you. I know FEMA is working on publishing new maps right now, and I think we've already passed the revision period. But can we still go back between revisions with new data that we get from this?
You can remap.
Okay, at any time.
Yeah.
You don't
I
have
mean,
to do
it's,
it if they're designated.
No, theirs was more of like a county, I think this was a countywide study, and so, I would have to check if you have to pay the fee. It's, I'd have to look on like a general sort of Clomer Lomer type thing, you're paying like, between $6,000 and $7,000 to get the Clomer reviewed, and then the Lomer, another 6 or 7 or 8 maybe on the back end. But since y'all are a public entity, I think that they waive the fee, but I'd have to confirm that. They waive it for some people, and I'm not for sure.
One of our objectives will be to share our data with FEMA, in whatever relationship that needs to be, because I think what's critical is just to have the most current and relevant data.
And available to our property owners, business owners. Another question I had is, your modeling is dealing with, you're modeling it based on topography, pervious surfaces, that kind of thing. Do you have anything in your model that could account for like a residential stormwater program to encourage people uphill from the main, channel to keep water on their properties, and how that could affect the overall model?
So generally upland, any kind of stormwater program in the upland areas would likely be like bioretention. So you would be removing volume from the system. So if we could quantify, we would have to talk about that a little bit, how much would be expected up, but we could definitely, I think what you would end up doing is taking it off your rainfall event that you put in there. So I don't have 7 inches hitting everything. I have 6 inches or whatever that is. And you'd have to make sure you have enough storage to hold that 6 inches, but we could do something if we need to.
Okay. You mentioned that you're putting a level of service of about 25-year event on Dayton Boulevard, more like a 10-year event on the residential side streets. We do have some other thoroughfares that are somewhat major, namely Morrison Springs, Ashland Terrace, Signal Mountain Boulevard come to mind. Do you recall what level of service those roads are set to?
I don't know where we're at.
Yeah, those would be basin specific.
Okay.
So again, simply because Stringer's Branch runs parallel with Dayton Boulevard, that's your main channel. So each one of those basins would be looked at a little bit different.
Okay.
I guess once the model is set up, again, we design it so that we could put as much as 100-year in it. Basically, that means that you're going to have overflows in certain areas, and we track those overflows and account for that. But we can, once we've got it set up for the 100-year, we can run anything up to the 100 years. So if there was a need to run it at a larger storm, we could do that.
Okay. Whoever has a cell phone, if they could silence it. There's an alarm going off. Oh, that's my timer. Thank you, Miss Perry.
We kept looking
5:45
around
timer.
wondering whose
Whose phone is going off?
Turn
I
it
didn't-
off.
Didn't recognize the tone. Last question in that case. You mentioned that there was a discussion of what size pipe to inventory to. And you, at the beginning of the presentation, there was a 12-inch option, a 15-inch option, but then if I understand the presentation correctly, 18 inches ended up being the ultimate. So my question, this might be as much for Ms. Johnson as anyone. Are we planning to inventory beyond 18 inches down 15 inches now or in the future? Is that considered necessary, or are we have enough on our plate at this point?
Yeah, I think typically 12 inches is what you say under driveway culvert. So you could, one of our plans, one of our objectives that will come out of this plan is to identify replacement of those 12 inches with 15s. We will no longer allow you to go down to a 12. So just to inventory every driveway, that was a little bit of an overkill for this particular project. In addition to that cost, when we start getting into 12, you end up doubling, and that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of cost. Versus, are we capturing pipe size that's actually helping address the stormwater system itself? So I'm not going to say that it's wasteful or it's not. Engineers can give you better answers on that, but it is a starting point. It doesn't mean that we can't go back and capture, or more importantly, if we find an area that is of concern, we can always go back in and remap that particular area.
Director Tate, you have
I was
something to
gonna
add?
also add, we discussed this before the meeting with the March representatives. When this data is all built, all the models are all built and all collected, they will be able to incorporate this into our stormwater management program. And what they do as far as the heavy lifting and taking all of these measures, then the city, we can come back and add to the inventory and build our own inventory for the smaller structures that they can capture, like driveway connections or, that hidden tile that runs in somebody's backyard. So we can continue to build on this when Barge is finished.
In like an incremental way.
Right.
Once Barge is complete with their inventory and it gets turned over to the city, do we have a point person yet whose job it will be to manage that inventory, keep it updated?
And I think it'll be a joint effort, especially with the crews in the field when they find things and identify. Between myself and Greg and our onboarding and engineer tech, they will help us manage and make sure that what gets identified is meeting those standards. So we have a system in place.
Excellent. Well, my compliments to Public Works for being so responsive to the issues that they're finding. And gratitude to Barge Design Solutions for joining us today and for this excellent presentation. Any further questions for the team?
No.
Okay, thank you so much. We really
Thank you.
appreciate your time. All right, if it's all right with everyone, the only other two items on tonight's agenda will be on the 6 o'clock meeting, a grant acceptance and a fire engine replacement. This is the time we customarily take comments from resident citizens for items on this work session agenda. If everyone's all right with tabling these and going ahead and discussing them at the 6 o'clock meeting. All right. In that case, Mr. Granum, will you give the rules?
Thank you, Mayor. This is the time for citizen comments. Please observe these rules. Comments are limited to 2 minutes or less, and the city recorder will operate a timer. Please respect her direction and conclude any comments if time expires. Comments should be addressed to the board as a whole and not to a particular commissioner, city staff, or the audience. The commission is here to listen, not to respond or engage in back and forth, so please do not expect to reply during public comment. At this time, citizens are invited to the podium to comment. Please begin by stating your name and address.
All right. If there are no comments, then we'll go ahead. Oh, Mr. McCabe, would you like to speak?
Clifford McCabe, 2618 Berkeley. Okay, I heard a lot about Strange Branch and I heard about the feeders, and that's all well and good. But I'm wondering, are they the ones that we're going to map out all the piping, not personal, but of the city? Like my street, Berkeley, where the hill goes like this, and then it basically levels out, maybe even a little incline, and instead of going down the hill, they diverted across the street. Is there a lot of that in Red Bank, and has that been looked at and examined and planned for, or just going to be leave it like that is? See, so because that was a concern, and obviously he got a house right beside me, and he actually put a tile in to do that water. But there's many other places in town that have that same problem, and that's the way it was done years ago. Well, did they take it into account, and do they know those things? They mapped up the big things, but the smaller ones, I'm wondering if they did. I didn't hear specifically that they had. That's my question.
Thank you, Mr. McCabe. Ms. Johnson, would you like to, would you like to respond to that at this time or a later time?
So the presentation tonight is very preliminary. They are not finished with the whole project, but as we go, especially when we're made aware of areas that have flooding, yards that are retaining water, that's where we're also sending the team to take a look at to see, is there a culvert, is there a tile somewhere that the water's not making its way to? So they may not be individually mapping private property tiles, but the system discharges and it gets into the inlet in our public system in some form or fashion. So at the end of the day, to be able to have this data and find the points, it just helps us narrow down what's going in between. So that may not be as fine-tuned right now, but it helps us get that next step closer.
Thank you, Deputy Director. All right, any other comments from the residents present? Any other business to discuss from the board?
I got something I want to bring up,
Oh.
okay, and without the thing, you know, before we done our park assessment plan, we looked at buying the two pieces of property, the things and the stove all, and the, what now?
Swope, was it the swope?
Swope property, yeah, so did I say stove? I said stove. But the Swope property and the Hickson property, and after, because it was wanting to kind of see to where, you know, we were when we done our park inventory, and I was just wondering if there's any appetite between any of you guys to, put that back on the.
Oh, I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, I mean, to see if we can make an offer on that property or anything, because to me, it looked like when we done all of our inventory, we was, of course, on the north side, we was really short, but you know, that would have been another spot that would have been, collecting the walk. So I didn't know if there's any appetite looking that further or not.
So my understanding is the Parks and Rec master plan is not quite complete yet. But I have been curious whether the Parks and Rec master plan will include any recommendations in regards to that property, because I do recall the discussion when we previously discussed the potential purchase of the Swope property was to wait until that master plan was complete and see what those recommendations were. You don't happen to know if there are any recommendations one way or the other on that yet?
Yeah, I wouldn't be comfortable saying one way or the other this evening, but I definitely will follow up with the consultants and make sure that that particular history, what we walk through with our due diligence, and the property itself, and have them take a consideration of that to see if it does fit into the Parks and Recreation master plan.
Okay.
And Mayor, I'll add that, Park Manager Grady is gonna be into commission on the 16th and again on the 6th. So the next two commission meetings, he will bring in for discussion the Park and Rec master plan.
Excellent. In that case, if he might be able to speak to that property in particular to address Commissioner Phillips' question.
Well, I know that we was kind of, in other words, it fell off right there on the thing, and I don't know why, and I didn't know if it was because the parks wasn't done or whatever, and I just didn't know if there's any appetite for it. That's all I'm asking.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up, because I'm, you know, keen with that being my neighborhood and it being within the, you know, one of the high need areas for the 10-minute walk to a park initiative.
Sure.
I was pretty keen on that property myself, to add it to the city inventory. So I have been anxiously awaiting the outcome of the.
Well, and maybe we bring it up at that time or whatever. I don't know, but you know, I don't want to waste our time. If everybody says no, then it's like, okay, next. But you know, if it's not, then you know, we'll.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing a straw poll, I would be interested in pursuing that.
Okay.
Or looking at it again. I had a conversation with Mr. Grantham some months ago after that all fell off. And I mean, I think that also is contingent on the property owner being willing to step back into negotiation with the city too. Right?
Well, yeah, you know.
Yeah, as far as I know, it's still available, but I don't know for a fact. I haven't heard about it selling. I'll put it that way.
Well, you know. Yeah, well, and they might just tell us to go kick rocks. I don't know, but you know, I didn't know if there'd be willing to any kind of appetite for it. You know, and you know, so and if we needed to, everybody think about it, that's fine. And then we'll talk about it on the 16th. That'd be fine too. And if not, that's fine too. You know, it's just kind of wanting to
maybe
I'd say regurgitate, but yeah. Yeah.
plan on a more in-depth discussion when Jeffrey comes back with more information about the Parks and Rec master plan.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Phillips.
I had a question about, and Mr. Tate might be able to answer this, but I noticed welcome to Red Bank signs that were posted up that had the population number and the speed limit is 25, and are those at the entrances more or less? Okay, Morrison Springs.
Morrison Springs, Brown Town,
Delashment.
Memorial. We put 7 of those up across the
Seven,
city.
okay, thank you.
It looks really good. Thank you for bringing that up, Jamie.
7.
All right,
Well,
any
I got as
other?
close as I could and took a picture of it, so I didn't drive by too fast, 25 miles an hour.
I want to see the
Almost
welcome to
on the
Red Bank
West Coast.
sign back in Stringer's Ridge on the trail. 'Cause I always
Oh,
like that. Yeah.
yeah.
Drive by and,
We have the sign.
okay, let's do the sign.
Ha.
Good.
It's in a safe place.
All right, any other business to discuss? Okay, if not, then we'll adjourn briefly and reconvene for our 6 o'clock meeting.
We should move